Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another live stream here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So this evening we're continuing with talking about Dhamma practice for householders. First, I'd like to start with a period of guided meditation. So lightly guided meditation. So you can start by getting in a comfortable meditation posture, sitting up nice and straight. I recommend bringing your hands together in your lap. And taking a few long, slow, deep breaths. With each breath, letting your body and mind relax. Letting your whole body relax. So keeping your posture upright, but letting all the flesh hang loosely from your bones. So there's no need to tense any muscles anywhere in the body. Letting all the muscles in your body soften, release. So just enjoying being here in the present moment with nothing you need to do, no duties, no responsibilities, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to plan, nothing you need to do at all. You can just let the body and mind relax, enjoying the stillness, enjoying the silent stillness saturated with attention. So the more still your body is, the more pleasant it is. The more silent the mind is, the more pleasant it is. And the more attentive you are to body-mind, the more pleasant it is. So completely enjoying this experience of stillness and alertness. Whatever thoughts or memories or emotions drift through the mind, don't get involved in them. Just let them pass through without sticking. Peacefully, serenely observing the ever-changing flow of body-mind sensation. The moment you notice the mind is latching onto something, grabbing at a thought or an emotion or a sensation, the moment you notice the mind grabbing something, immediately release your grip. Immediately drop whatever the mind was grasping at. And even releasing the perception of solidity. So letting the body and mind be felt as insubstantial, impermanent, constantly changing, nothing solid or stable to be found. Just letting the mind relax into this awareness, constant flow, constant change, insubstantiality. There's nowhere for the mind to stick, yet no need for the mind to move. So let the mind rest, silent, still, and alert. Within the vast field of constant change. And since everything is insubstantial, constantly changing, there's no need to react to anything. So whether we perceive it as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, just let it flow through the mind without reacting. Enjoying the deep serenity that comes from non-reactivity. Remember, don't solidify any sensation of body or mind. Their natural state is to be fluid, ephemeral, ghostly. They only seem solid if we choose to perceive them as solid. So do not solidify any sensation of body or mind. Let everything that arises melt away, like ice under a hot sun. And as we come to the end of the meditation, again take a few Long, slow, deep breaths. Slowly open your eyes if they were closed. Slowly move your body a little bit. Do a little stretching if you need to. Anywhere that feels tense or sore, you can give it a little massage, a little bit of stretching. And before the Dhamma talk, we can start by paying homage to all the Buddhas of past, present, and future. So you can join your hands in Anjali and bring up that mind of deep respect and gratitude for all the awakened beings who reached enlightenment and shared the teachings with others. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. It's always good to start any Dhamma session with some meditation practice. It helps to put the mind in the right frame, remind us of our innate capacity for serenity and wisdom. So this topic for this evening, so this is carrying on with a series that was started by Ayasoma, a subject of Dhamma for householders. And just a few minutes before the session was to start, she asked me what topic I wanted to talk about. And I answered emptiness, because that's a topic I always like to talk about, and I don't speak about as often as I would like to. And what came to mind was an incident that happened a few years ago at the end of a retreat. So it had been a 10-day retreat. All the participants were lay people, so I was the only monk there. And at the end of the retreat, I was talking to a couple of the lay people. And I was talking about different meditation methods, so practices on perceiving impermanence and perceiving emptiness and perceiving not self. So these really important and profound practices, which can lead all the way to full enlightenment. So I was talking about these deep insight practices connected with emptiness and impermanence and not self. And one of the lay people, he said to me, he said, "Oh, Bhante, we are just householders. We cannot do these practices." And I remember thinking, why not? Why not? Why would you tell yourself something like that? Why would you believe something like that? Why would you believe that you're somehow incapable or unqualified to do these practices just because you're not ordained monastic. So, of course, those who are familiar with my other talks on the subject know that I'm a very big fan of monastic life and a very big fan of ordination. And I love to encourage people to pursue monastic life. If that's what they're interested in, you should get ordained. So I am a big fan of monastic life, and I deeply believe in its value and its ability to support our practice, its ability to help us have good conditions for practicing the path to awakening, especially its ability to support the practices of renunciation, which are the core central component of Buddhist practice. So ultimately, Buddhist practice is all about renunciation, and monastic life is all about renunciation. So this is why monasticism is always at the heart of Buddhism, from its beginning to its end. But there is nowhere in the suttas where the Buddha says that the practices of impermanence, emptiness, and not self are only for monastics. There's nowhere where he says that these practices are not for householders or not for lay people. In fact, one of the interesting remarks that we find in the suttas is the Buddha is talking about the conditions that will eventually lead to the decline and disappearance of the Dhamma, which will eventually lead to the Buddha Dhamma disappearing from the world. Because that's of course the nature of the cycle of samsara, is that Buddhism appears and lasts for a while and then disappears. And then a while later it appears again and lasts for a while and disappears again, and so on. So he said one of the things that will lead to the disappearance of Buddhism is when people no longer take any interest in the discourses about emptiness. Instead, they just want to talk about poetry, but they don't take any interest in the deep, profound discourses about emptiness. And I find this quite remarkable. So again, this is in the Pali Suttas. So you every now and then you come across this tired old misbelief that emptiness is a Mahayana concept. But actually it's in countless Theravada suttas. And again, the Buddha pointed out that a disinterest in teachings about emptiness is one of the critical signs that Buddhism is about to disappear from the world completely. And again, he doesn't say only monastics should be interested in emptiness, but rather he says when Buddhist practitioners in general are not interested in the teachings on emptiness, then this is a sign that Buddhism is declining and will soon disappear. So even if you think that as a householder you're incapable of perceiving emptiness, you should still take an interest in it. Because by taking an interest in it, you can stave off the death of Buddhism for a little while longer. But also, it's also important to keep in mind that the Buddha himself pointed out that there were hundreds upon hundreds of both householders and monastics who attained stream entry, who attained once returner, who attained non-returner. So clearly, stages of awakening are accessible to householders, accessible to lay people. And the critical component for awakening is this direct understanding of the impersonal nature of all things. So direct understanding of impermanence, emptiness, and not self. This is the critical understanding which leads to stream entry and which leads to the higher attainments beyond stream entry, eventually culminating in full awakening. So the practices of coming to a perception of emptiness, direct experience of sunyata, usually the easiest way to begin is through practicing the perception of impermanence. So we begin with mindfulness practice, with awareness of our body-mind experience, So without clear awareness in the present moment, it's very difficult to come to any understanding of the phenomena in the present moment. So if you're not looking at something, then you can't see what it is. Quite simple. So if you're not looking at your present moment experience, then you can't see its true nature. And so it's not really, there's not really any way to practice wisdom without developing mindfulness, some degree of clear present moment awareness of body-mind. And as we become increasingly aware of body-mind, then we recognize that it's made up of sensations. So what is our body? What is the body? The body is a collection of sensations. So we usually tend to conceptualize the body as some kind of solid object that exists in space in relationship to other solid objects, but that's utter nonsense. That's not our experience. It's just an idea that we have. What is our actual experience of the body? Pay close attention to your body. What's the actual experience? It's a bunch of sensations. And what's going on with those sensations? They're constantly changing. Every moment, a bunch of sensations appear and then immediately disappear. And moment after moment after moment, it's a different set of sensations, which have some similarity to each other, but they're not necessarily the same. There's some causal continuity. For example, you might notice that if you're cold and you put on a sweatshirt, then you're warm. So what's happened? You've noticed a causal continuity. There's a rising cold sensation, cold sensation, cold sensation, putting on sweater sensation, putting on sweater sensation, warm sensation, warm sensation. So still what's actually happening is a sequence of sensations arising and ceasing, a sequence of sensations appearing and disappearing. But we can see a causal sequence connecting them. We can see how the introduction of intention can change the quality of the sensations that are arising and ceasing moment by moment. But this does not then lead to any kind of solid or persistent sensation. As we're paying attention to our sensations, we can clearly see that none of them are solid or persistent. All of them have the same nature of arising and vanishing, the same nature of arising and ceasing. And as you pay closer attention, you also recognize that all of them have the nature of being insubstantial. And this arises naturally from recognizing the impermanence of things. When we recognize that things are constantly changing, then our perception shifts. We stop perceiving them as solid, persistent objects. Our perception shifts and we start to see them as fluid. One metaphor that I've always found very helpful is that of ice. So what is ice? Well, ice is frozen water, it's solidified water. So practicing the perception of impermanence is allowing the ice to melt. So normally we perceive our body as this solid block of ice, but actually it's fluid water. It's this constantly flowing rush of sensations. So that's its nature. That's how it's always been. So our perceiving it as a solid object is a misperception caused by not recognizing its true nature, its nature of impermanence, its nature of insubstantiality. So through perceiving impermanence, we can start to become aware of the insubstantial nature of experience. You can start to feel the body not as a solid object, but as something mirage-like. So one of the popular metaphors that the Buddha used, or similes that the Buddha used, was the lump of foam. So you've got a group of bubbles, and it looks like a solid object. But when you pay closer attention, you realize there's not really anything there. There's the illusion of something being there. But actually there's no substance to it. It's completely hollow. It's empty of any real substance or essence. So the Buddha says our physical body is the same way. When you're not paying close attention, it seems like a solid, real object. But when you pay close attention, you realize that it's hollow, it's empty, it's insubstantial. There's no essence to it. There's no persistent, solid realness to it. So our perception shifts from it being something solid and real to it being something illusory, insubstantial, mirage-like, not quite real. And it's the same with the mind. And even drawing a distinction between body and mind is more academic than practical. In actuality, everything is mind. All experience is mind. We talk about body and mind as though it was two separate things, but actually the body is experienced through the mind. So all we ever experience is mind. We've never, ever, ever experienced anything physical. In fact, it's impossible. It's literally impossible to have a physical experience. You can only ever have a mental experience. What is our body? Our body is an image in the mind. What is physical sensation? It's sensations in the mind. That's all it is. So then the perceptions that we apply to the body map perfectly well to what we perceive in the mind as well. And in fact, with the mind, it becomes even more inescapably obvious that everything is impermanent and insubstantial, that there's nothing persistent, nothing lasting, nothing solid, nothing real. This doesn't mean there's nothing going on, because clearly something seems to be happening here. Something seems to be going on. But it's not solid. It's not stable. There's nothing here which you can grab onto and hold onto. All we can do is to constantly try to create something that resembles an experience that we had a moment ago. And this is actually what we're doing. Whenever we latch onto a thought or a memory or an idea, it's not that that thought is persisting in the mind. Rather, it's that we're constantly recreating the thought to give it the illusion, the semblance of persistence. It's actually the same with emotions and sensations of any sort. Something appears, and we don't want it to go away, so we try to recreate it moment after moment after moment. So we're creating the illusion of persistence through deliberately manufacturing mental objects. And then we convince ourselves that they're real. It's just mind-blowing how good we are at deluding ourselves, how good we are at fooling ourselves. But when we start to pay closer attention to our mental processes, we can start to catch this process while it's happening. So you might be wondering, what does any of this have to do with being a householder? And the answer is it has absolutely nothing to do with being either a householder or a monastic, because that distinction is completely irrelevant to the perception of emptiness. Householder and monastic are ideas, which are themselves empty of any inherent existence, which themselves have no true essence, no true reality. They're useful conventions, as I said at the beginning of the talk, but they're not relevant whatsoever to emptiness. They have no actual substance to them. They have no actual reality to them. So saying, oh, I can't develop the perception of emptiness because I'm just a householder, well, that's absolutely ridiculous statement to make. It's utterly absurd. Because when you practice the perception of emptiness, then the concept of householder disappears along with everything else. Simply not relevant. So how do you practice this as a householder? Well, it's actually not really any different from how you practice it as a monastic. You start with developing your foundational practices, generosity and morality, is basic foundational practices. You practice mindfulness and clear awareness at all times, in all postures, and all activities. So whatever you're doing, pay attention. Be clearly aware. as you're doing it. Be clearly aware of body and mind as you're doing whatever you're doing. As Ayasama was saying yesterday, avoid multitasking. Practice single tasking. Whatever you're doing, do just that. Don't do anything else. And that also means with your mind. So whatever you're doing, don't do anything else with your mind. So when you're washing the dishes, don't be thinking about what you're going to do later on. Just wash the dishes. When you're walking from the meditation hall to your room, well, don't think about what you're going to do in your room. Just walk from the meditation hall to your room, and that's all. Don't do anything else. So don't do anything with body-mind except for the single task that you're currently engaged in. And then whatever task you're engaged in, pay full attention to the flow of sensations. And recognize that those sensations are constantly changing. Again, the perception of impermanence is the gateway to the perception of emptiness. It's possible to go directly to the perception of emptiness, but it's much easier to enter it through the perception of impermanence. When you recognize that all things are constantly changing, then it's much easier to recognize that those things are insubstantial. They're hollow, illusory. There's nothing solid or real there. And you can do this all day long, whatever activity you're engaged in. Interestingly enough, the perception of impermanence, the perception of emptiness, does not in any way impede you from engaging in ordinary activities. What it does do is it gives you a sense of detachment from those activities. It helps keep you from getting obsessed with them. Helps keep you from getting absorbed into whatever you're doing. It gives you a sense of impersonal detachment from the activity, of emotional disconnect, so that you don't get swept up in it. You're not disturbed and bothered by things because you recognize that they're ultimately insubstantial. So there's nothing to be bothered by. There's no point in being bothered by anything. And in this way, the mind starts to settle into equanimity. So this deep state of attentive non-reactivity. This mind which clearly knows all things that occur, but is not disturbed or bothered by anything. Which doesn't grasp at the pleasant or reject the unpleasant. And which eventually starts to drop the concept of pleasant and unpleasant entirely. And of course, this is supported by doing plenty of meditation practice. Formal meditation practice makes it much easier to develop and sustain the perception of emptiness throughout one's activities and throughout one's day and everything that one is doing. So of course, make time to meditate. Get up early and do meditation first thing in the morning. Perhaps recite the 5 precepts, the 3 refuges, qualities of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Do some meditation practice first thing in the morning. And try to get some kind of experience of impermanence and emptiness in your meditation practice. And then try to keep that with you as you go throughout your day. And periodically remind yourself as you go throughout your day. One of the problems with Buddhist practice is forgetfulness. So when we're doing our meditation, we're like, yes, everything is impermanent. Nothing is worth holding on to. Nothing is worth reacting to. Then we get up from our meditation and we're like, everything is solid and real. And I am a real person and I hate that and I want that and I like that. So we just immediately forget our Buddhist practice and we go right back in our delusional perceptions. So this is one of the real problems that we need to watch out for, is this rapidity and ease with which we forget the Buddha's teachings and revert to our habits of unenlightened thinking, our habits of foolish thinking and behavior. So it's important to constantly remind ourselves as we go throughout the day. Constantly remind ourselves of the Buddha's instructions. Constantly remind ourselves of the Buddha's teachings. Constantly remind ourselves to practice mindfulness, equanimity, the perception of impermanence. Constantly remind ourselves to maintain an awareness of the emptiness of all phenomena, that any phenomenon which is appearing is just appearing because of specific conditions. In a very real sense, whatever is happening is not real in and of itself, but rather it's a combination of our own mental projection with some external phenomena. So there's some external phenomenon, and it meets our internal concepts about the world, and together that creates the illusion of an object, the illusion of us experiencing an object. But fundamentally, there is no object. There's just some external phenomenon, and there's some internal concept. And together that creates the illusion of an object. So is the object real? Not really. Something's happening. Once again, something's happening. External sense impression is contacting the mind. That's definitely happening. But none of it has any reality to it. And the experience that we have, this experience of solid, discrete, persistent objects interacting with each other in three-dimensional space, that's all utter nonsense that exists only within our own imagination. So all of that then can be said to be empty. Is there an experience happening? Yeah, there is. Is that experience absolutely real? Definitely not. And as we develop the perception of impermanence, an awareness of the insubstantiality of all phenomena, an awareness of the participatory process of creating our own experience through projecting our concepts and ideas and expectations onto sensory impressions, then we start to become aware that our experience of the world is a fabrication composed primarily of our own delusions. Fabrication created primarily by our own mind, primarily by our own misunderstanding of the world. So it can't be said to quite be real. At the same time, it's very important what we do. It's very important what choices we make. So whatever choices we make shape the development of our mind. So we can make choices that lead either towards deeper wisdom or choices that lead to deeper delusion. So it's very important as we cultivate and maintain a perception of emptiness that we always also cultivate a very strong sense of compassion, a deep sense of morality, the importance of kindness and blamelessness in everything that we do. Because otherwise it's possible to drift into this cold, heartless attitude of like, well, everything is empty, it's all unreal, so it doesn't really matter if I hurt people and steal things. But that's just another concept in the mind. It's just another misunderstanding of reality. It's another trap that we can fall into through forgetting the Buddha's teachings, through not recognizing our actual experience. So again, coming back to the basics. So get up early every morning, do a little bit of chanting. Again, 3 refuges, 5 precepts, Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Do some meditation practice. As long as you have time for, which realistically you always have time. Then as you go throughout your day, try to keep that mindfulness, that equanimity, that perception of impermanence, that recollection of emptiness, that recollection of the peace that can come through stillness of mind, through the relinquishing of sankharas. This is another way, by the way, another way of talking about the perception of emptiness is the perception of emptiness is the relinquishment of all sankharas. Just let go of all things. And let go of all mental formations, let go of all mental fabrications. Let go of all conceptualizations, all concepts of objects and people and things and ideas and activities. Let go of all those concepts. And it's not that all things disappear when we let go of our concepts of those things. Rather, it's that we become aware of the way things really are, which is not what we think it is. One of the Buddha's statements, which I've always found incredibly beautiful, the Buddha says, whatever one conceives it to be, reality is other than that. If I recall correctly, yena yena himanyanti tena so anyata. Whatever one conceives it to be, it is actually different from that. So this very brief, beautiful statement, emphasizing the delusional nature of all conceptualization. All concepts and ideas are inherently wrong. Whatever you think the world is, that's not what the world is. Whatever you think reality is, that's definitely wrong. Whatever concept you have of reality is definitely not reality. So this is another way of approaching the perception of emptiness. Drop all of your concepts and ideas about reality. Drop all of your ideas about objects and activities and things and people and so on. And just open up. What's actually going on? What's actually happening? Beyond all the concepts and ideas and illusions of objects and things, what's actually going on? So just dropping the sankharas, dropping the illusion of objects moment after moment. And yet, nonetheless, we still have to make choices. We still have to do things in the world. And for that, again, we fall back on our precepts. We fall back on our basic commitment to compassion, to treating every moment with the question of how can I reduce the suffering in this moment? How can there be freedom from suffering in this moment? And since we're also practicing the perception of not-self, then this doesn't mean how can I reduce only my own suffering, because that's just self-centeredness. But it's how can I reduce the suffering present in this moment? So that means the suffering for all the beings that are present. So the mind which develops the perception of emptiness, the perception of not-self, naturally will have deep compassion for all beings, deep compassion for every being they encounter, because there's no distinction between my suffering and your suffering. There's just a recognition that suffering is happening, and it's time to diminish it. Whenever we encounter suffering, what can we do to diminish it? So ultimately, you cannot separate the perception of emptiness from the practice of compassion. They arise together. So I think I've said more than enough on the subject. Whenever talking about emptiness, I feel like there's really only two options, which is to say very little or to talk for hours and hours and hours. Because this is a topic which is beyond words. It's something which is meant to be felt. It's meant to be experienced. And this experience is something which it's quite subtle and it's quite delicate. And if we get lost in concepts and ideas, well, that's definitely not it. Whatever you think emptiness is, that's not what emptiness is. Whatever concept you have about emptiness, that's definitely not it. But through practicing the perception of impermanence and relinquishing the sankharas present in each moment, dropping the illusion of solidity, the illusion of separate objects, then you can start to get in touch with the actual direct experience of emptiness. Again, whether you're a household or a monastic, it doesn't matter. You can have this direct experience of emptiness, the true nature of things. So I think I'll end at that point. And at this time, if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you. So we have lots of friends joining in. Miguel, Gita, Jeffrey, Kumo, Tune, Vidura, Anita, Patricia, Rick, Scotch, and many others. So Anita asks, Bhante, please share your experience of how you keep up the constantly moving from moment to moment. Well, again, it starts with developing a perception of impermanence during sitting meditation. So when you don't have anything else to do or any distractions or any engagements, so there's nothing to do except recognize impermanence. So that's how it starts. And as you cultivate it under those conditions, you start to get a sense as to what it feels like. So how to direct the mind in that way. Then that makes it easier for you to cultivate and maintain the perception of impermanence while engaging in activities other than formal meditation. But it does ultimately always rely upon our formal meditation practice. Without that, it's very difficult. And reminding yourself throughout the day. So some people keep it as a mantra. They just keep telling themselves, anicca, anicca, anicca. And that's meant to be a reminder to pay attention to the impermanence that we're constantly experiencing. Remember many years ago, Ajahn Amaro was talking about his first long meditation retreat. And he said he made 3 simple resolutions for this long retreat. Get up when I'm done sleeping, stop eating when I'm full, and develop the perception of impermanence. So 3 very simple determinations. Don't sleep too much, don't eat too much, and perceive impermanence. So having that determination in mind, constantly reminding ourselves of that determination, then we'll remember to do it. One of the definitions of the word sati, so normally we define the word sati as mindfulness, but it also has the meaning of memory, of remembering. Also the word sanya, we commonly translate the word sanya as perception or recognition, but it also has the meaning of memory. So anicca sanya means remembering that all things are impermanent. Sati means remembering to pay attention to the present moment. So we do have to remind ourselves. Again, we forget so easily. We fall back into our amnesiac state of the non-practitioner. We do it so easily. In fact, it's common to spend most of our day completely forgetting about impermanence, completely forgetting about emptiness, pretending as though reality is made up of permanent, solid, real things. Because that's what we're used to doing. That's what we've been doing for countless lifetimes. So we have to constantly remind ourselves to pay attention to impermanence and emptiness. Otherwise we forget. In a snap of a finger, we forget. I remember when I was a junior monk many years ago, I was trying to remind myself to practice metta all the time. So I made a bunch of little signs that said metta, and I put them all over, like everywhere I went through my day, I put a little sign that said metta. So I'd have all these reminders throughout the day to help me remember to practice metta. So you can do the same thing. Put up little signs all throughout your home that say anicca or sunyata, impermanence, emptiness. Put them up all over, little reminders. Your friends might think that's weird, but that's their problem. They need the reminders too. Okay, then we have a question. Rick asks, how do we balance emptiness with compassion? I think I spoke about that. While it's true that all beings are inherently empty, it's also true that they're suffering. Just as we ourselves experience suffering, we know that I also am inherently empty, and yet there's definitely some suffering going on here. So compassion is the wish for beings to be free of suffering. So although from one perspective you can say that there are no sentient beings and there is therefore no suffering, from one perspective you can say that, and it's true from a certain angle. From another angle, there's clearly a bunch of sentient beings going around and they're clearly not having a great time. So we need to recognize that there are these two sides to reality. So there is the side of emptiness, but there's also the side of form. And if you focus on one to the point of neglecting the other, then you're only catching half the picture. You're only catching half of reality. So emptiness then, the perception of emptiness is very good for developing equanimity. Because you see that the nature of all things is that there's not really anything solid or real. But at the same time, you recognize that nonetheless, all of these not solid, not real sentient beings have the definite experience of suffering. So we recognize that and we wish for it to go away. We wish for that suffering to dissipate. And we do what we can to help. And Anita asked for the Pali on whatever you conceive as not reality. I would have to look it up, so send me an email and I'll get you the exact Pali quote for that. Then Kumu asks, what is the answer when one asks, why must I bother about my next birth or samsara when that being has no connection with me, this birth? Well, then you might as well ask, why bother about tomorrow when it has no connection with today? Why bother about the next minute when it has no connection with this minute? Why bother about the next second when it has no connection with this second? It's exactly the same line of reasoning after all. Nonetheless, the people that you're referring to, they probably do things like grocery shopping for tomorrow. They go out and buy food for tomorrow, even though it will not be the same being that eats the food tomorrow. So clearly they believe that the choices they make with this being will affect a future being. So you might ask them, why do you bother buying things for tomorrow when it will not be the same being tomorrow that gets to use those things? And one of two things will happen. Either they'll start to realize the point here, or they'll stop shopping for tomorrow, which is also perfectly fine, I have to say, because they'll learn the lesson soon enough if they take that course. Then Meep Sheep, I don't quite know how to interpret that name, but there's a person here named Meep Sheep, says, I find that during meditation, I imagine there is a core substance to myself that is observing everything else. Any advice on moving away from this? Well, that's actually an excellent starting point for meditation practice. Some teachers call it being the knowing. So turning attention to the innate knowing capacity of mind. So rather than getting caught up in the objects, focus on taking the stance of the third person observer. So just knowing whatever is coming and going instead of being wrapped up in reacting to it and obsessing about it and participating in it. Just know what comes and goes. That's a great starting point. The next step would be recognizing that the knowing itself is also impermanent and therefore empty, and therefore can't possibly be you. Consciousness is also impermanent and empty. Awareness is also impermanent and empty. Those are aspects of mind which are impermanent and empty. So you can also observe that awareness, consciousness, knowing, these things also are not permanent. They're not stable. They're not persistent. They're also subject to changing, subject to arising and vanishing. So that's not who we are either. So yeah, the perception of impermanence is meant to be applied to all things, even to knowing, the quality of knowingness, quality of knowing itself. And that's the last question from online. Any questions from the monastery residents? No? Good enough for today? Okay. So we'll go ahead and end at that time. So you can join your hands in Anjali, and we'll end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And may we all swiftly attain awakening.